that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about retirement and get people ready as they prepare for retirement, things they need to encounter. And with it being close to the end of the year, November already upon us, it is time to seriously think about RMDs if you are RMD eligible. And the questions come up. A woman wrote to an advice column saying it was time for her to start taking those required minimum distributions, but she doesn't need the money, and she wanted to know what the options were, what options she has. What should we tell her?
Well, when people ask, what should I do if I don't need my required minimum distribution, there's a couple different options. Now, number one, first and foremost, I'd say don't fail to take your required minimum distribution, because it's one of the largest penalties that I'm aware of. And in fact, failure to take your required minimum distribution could result in a 50% penalty for the amount that you were supposed to take out of the account. So this is an area that you don't want to forget about. I also say that, the burden of taking out the required minimum distribution, it falls on the account owner. Sometimes people think, well, my financial advisor or the financial institution is going to take care of that. But generally speaking, most financial institutions and or advisors, they can't just automatically process required minimum distributions without a client's authorization, either verbal or written, to do so. So again, if you're over the age 73 and you haven't taken out your required minimum distribution, I'd say get going on this. Failure to do so could result in massive penalties. Then if you fall into the camp of where you have enough money, maybe you have other sources of income, life is good, you don't need your required minimum distribution. The one thing that I would talk about is, first of all, look at qualified distributions that you could take in donations to charitable organizations. So a lot of people are not aware that you could be eligible to donate your required minimum distribution directly to a charitable organization and not have that income show up on your tax return. And this is why it's good for you and it's good for the charitable organization. So if you're already donating to your church, but you let the money come out of your IRA, go into your bank account, and then you write out a check to your church, what happens is when the money comes out of the retirement account, it's taxable income. It's going to show up on that individual's, tax return. So what you could lose is 20 or 25% right away in the form of taxes. That's less money that you can give to that charitable organization because the tax man's already grabbed it. Yet if you take that distribution and you give it directly to the charitable organization, making that check payable to the charitable organization, then it's not going to show up on your tax return, and can also satisfy for what your qualified required distribution is. In addition to that, that charitable organization is not going to have to pay taxes on it. So again, they're going to be able to keep 100% of that. The other thing I would tell you is, keep in mind that this advice that I'm giving you is, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant. So when you're looking at your individual situation from a tax perspective, you always want to take and have a conversation with your CPA before you make any of these distributions or decisions. Another one that's a popular option that we run into is maybe gifting to children or grandchildren. So for the year 2023, you can give each child or grandchild $17,000 per person. If you're married, that goes up to $34,000. Again, each individual could make that gift. It doesn't help you with your taxes as a deduction because it's a gift, but it can be a couple of unique things that you could do. One, you can kind of start to build the foundation for that grandchild for their financial future, whether that's setting money aside in an account that they could use when they become an adult. That's like a UTMA, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. Whether you want to set it aside in like a 529, want to get it into a plan ultimately to help them with college. There's a couple of pros and cons to how you can do that. Maybe your children may be impacted financially. Maybe it's your desire to not just leave all of the money when you pass away. And there's things that you could do now, and you can make some of those gifts here at the holiday time. Now, when you gift to children or grandchildren, one of the best advices that I can give is you also want to explain to that individual that, look, this year was a good year financially for us or for myself, and I'm making this gift this year because we had such a good year. I don't know that it's going to be like that each and every year in the future. Because what happens is sometimes children or grandchildren or other people, they get to this point where it's an expectation. So if you gift this year, they might think about the expectation is they're going to get a gift next year. So I think it's important that if you give that gift, that you explain that gift, that it may not be a gift each and every year. Sometimes you could fund insurances, or you could do it for long-term care. So life insurance still is one of the best vehicles, in my opinion, to transfer wealth from one generation to the next. And by taking a distribution and using the qualified distribution for a required minimum distribution, you could leverage those dollars specifically in the early years of the 70s to potentially pass more money on that could be tax-free for beneficiaries versus a fully taxable retirement account. And some of these policies, or you could purchase a policy that's straight long-term care insurance. And so either, some type of an insurance product like a life insurance that offered accelerated benefits for long-term care while you're alive, or just looking at a long-term care policy could help you shield those other assets that you have inside of that retirement account to protect them from a spend down. And last is, you could just invest that money into an after-tax account. So maybe there's some favorite stocks that you want to own. You don't need to invest that money, but you might need it at some point in the future. In an after-tax account, if you invested as a growth type strategy and that money grows for the next 10 or 15 years, under the current tax law, in an after-tax account, with a properly named beneficiary, when you leave that money over to, say, your child or grandchild, a lot of times individual stocks in an after-tax account get something called a stepped-up basis of death, meaning all taxes are forgiven, and that's not the case with most dollars in a retirement account. When it passes from one generation to the other, things are going to be done. So if you're listening, and again, you haven't done your required minimum distribution, the clock is ticking. You don't want to miss that deadline. It could result in a 50% penalty in the form of taxes if you fail to take that required minimum distribution. And if you don't know what to do with it, let's have a conversation. There could be some ways that I could show you how to leverage the dollars, set up those accounts for your grandchildren, talk to you about funding an asset protection plan for your long-term care, or tell you about some of our favorite stocks. So happy to have a conversation and help you out.
Lots of different options out there. And again, just because you don't need the money, that R stands for required, because the government, they would like that money. They would like for you to pay the taxes on it. And quite frankly, they would like you to neglect to take it so they can penalize you and then force you to. Don't do that option. Make sure you take care of your required minimum distributions before the end of the year. Look at the different options that you could use that money if you don't actually need it for income purposes. The team at America's Retirement Headquarters is here for you to have that conversation. 419-794-3030, or go into the website, arhq.com.